Our next presenter is Adam Losey from Loewsley Pllc. In his practice, Adam represents companies and individuals in high-stake litigation across the United States. In addition to his litigation practice, he routinely counsels clients on a variety of information, security, privacy, electronic discovery, technology contracting, social media, and internet-related matters. We're excited to hear about cybersecurity in the age of COVID. So thank you, Adam. Take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thanks again for having me. I really loved the Money Man and the attempt at the knock-knock joke. I'm actually going to try a one-person knock-knock joke because it sounds like fun, and my daughter has one that she really loves. And it's knock-knock. Who's there? Tank. Tank who? And then you're welcome is the punchline. So he was right. Knock-knock jokes actually don't work by yourself, but at least we tried. One of the hardest things about giving online presentations is I'm competing with the internet. The internet is very, very, very interesting. Way more interesting than I am, although I'm going to do my best. And it's a little bit difficult with the virtual format. A monologue probably isn't going to do the best at keeping you engaged. So throughout this presentation, you can ask questions. You can do that, I believe, by asking the moderator or somebody else, and they'll relay to me in the chat. You can send me an email at alosey@losey.law or whatever you want. The more questions, the better. The only advantage I have going on me over a YouTube video and the entire rest of the internet is I'm here for you, and that little live button in red at the top of the screen is indeed true. This is live. I'm here. I'm able to answer any specific questions you have. And to kind of help frame what's in the wheelhouse of what's a good question to ask, if we go to the next slide, talks a little bit about me. I represent a lot of companies in litigations all over the country. The red thread in those litigations is they tend to involve technology, cybersecurity, intellectual property. Anything that's kind of a blend of technology and law is a fair question for us. And this presentation is going to be more, and I'm going to go through a quick overview of what we're going to cover in a second, but on cybersecurity and breaches, but really anything at all in the wheelhouse of information security, privacy, electronic discovery, technology contracting, and weird internet and social media matters. Those are all fair game questions, and I'm live and able to answer them as you like throughout the presentation and afterwards. Now, that last bullet point said I was much more bearded than depicted at the left. That used to be true, but it's my 10th wedding anniversary today. And my wife really did not like the really aggressive beard that I had going during COVID. So I have gotten rid of it. So that bullet point is outdated. But I am still much fatter than the picture on the left. So that remains true. Next slide. So what we're going to cover today is a discussion of information security and privacy issues. So I'm going to walk through some of the more common issues that we see. And one of the good news points in this presentation is that probably like 90 to 98% of the really bad issues that we see pop up can be avoided by taking some pretty simple steps in advance. And then we'll walk through a couple breach response matters, so that if you haven't been through the drill, you understand a little bit better about what a data breach is like. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to it than just uh-oh, and then somebody gets an email in the mail with a coupon code for identity theft monitoring. Typically, the process involves working with incident response vendors, forensics, the Federal Bureau of Investigation or local law enforcement. Typically, it's FBI. Notification. So there's all kinds of weird overlapping and sometimes inconsistent notification requirements across this country and also internationally. Then eventual after the breach issues, a lot of times you'll see litigation and other remediation issues pop up. And then finally, some issues unique to the social service industry sector, which my understanding is where all of you are in. And so we're not going to cover any actual matters handled by the firm or discuss any pending litigation. And I think every lawyer pretty much has to say this as part of a presentation, but everything I'm talking about here are just my opinions and my analysis. They're not necessarily the opinions or analysis of any of our clients or of our firm. So, we may take positions in litigations, and we may have clients that have different opinions and different analyses, and that doesn't make them any more or less valid just because I've said something here, one way or the other during this presentation. So please, again, I'm here. It's live. Ask questions if they're not related to a pending case. They are all very much welcome. And again, you can do so through the moderator or through sending me an email at Losey, Losey, at Losey, Losey.law. All right, let's get into it. So, common issues and solutions. Business email compromise is probably the #1 data breach related issue that we see. Probably I hear about or one happens about every day. And that's just anecdotally at our firm for our clients. It happens constantly. I would be very surprised if there was any individual on this call or on this presentation that hasn't been affected by at least one of these, probably even this year. What a business email compromise is simply somebody getting into email accounts that shouldn't be in there. What they will typically do is phish password or something else by tricking someone, maybe getting into a database of passwords for websites where you may have, I don't know, if you had a Home Depot account, your password at Home Depot may be the same as your password at work. And if you're a CFO, somebody may be able to get the one database and try it on the other because they think you can get it, they can get it information that'll lead to money. Once somebody gets into an email account, typically what they do is they download a copy. So they get in, they download a copy of it, and then they might try and use it to try and send out bogus requests. But the main thing is they have a copy of all the information in the account, typically, which is where it gets a little bit messy because some folks have email accounts that have a lot of stuff. Good email hygiene, a little bit like flossing. Not everybody goes through their email every year to delete old things, sort, segregate. So, if you have a 10-year-old inbox with 1 million people's information in it and somebody downloads a copy of it, it's a very difficult situation to deal with. A multi-factor is your friend on preventing business email compromise. The short version is if you just have a username and password protecting an email account, somebody's going to get into it. It's highly unlikely that just with the username and password, you're going to be able to keep an account secure for a wide variety of reasons. On an individual level, maybe if you have like a very long alphanumeric prefix that you change a lot. But if your company-wide policy is just username and email and password will get you into an email account, somebody's going to get compromised. Multi-factor is the best way to try and prevent that. Basically, every email system that I'm aware of that's a larger scale email system has the ability to have what's called multi-factor authentication. Again, I'd be surprised if anybody listening wasn't familiar with this in one way or another, but all it means is that there's more than just a password. Multi-factor, there's another factor. So it could be a text message to your phone. It could be, I have an app on my phone. I'm certainly not going to show you my passwords, but Google Authenticator on your phone or another authentication app where there's a seed on your phone that gives you an alphanumeric prefix or a phone call. A lot of them will call your phone and give you some sort of code, something more than just a password. And as long as you have multi-factor set up for your systems, you're going to stop like 99% of attacks. Just for the record, the phone-based one, the Google Authenticator or whatever local authenticator is a little bit more secure than a text message or another phone-based one. The reason being, particularly for high-profile folks, and we've had a couple of these, someone can go into a telecom carrier, impersonate you, and get a copy of your SIM card. It happens. It's called SIM jacking. You can Google it. And SIM jacking would only allow somebody to pierce multi-factor if it was set up as a text message for your phone or a phone call to your phone or something else based on your phone number. If it's based on the actual app on the phone itself, the seed is on your phone. So somebody would need your phone or would need the little token or key plus the password to get into your account. So, the question I get asked a lot is which multi-factor is better? All of them are better than just having a username and password. but having something on a token, like a standalone token or on your phone, is going to be better than a text or a phone call. Ransomware is another common issue that we see. Ransomware is basically forced encryption. So it locks down information so that you can't get it because someone has encrypted it and hidden the password from you. Ransomware is an interesting thing, and I used to talk about this a lot, and I never saw any government entities writing about it, but in the past week or so, some of them have been saying what I have been saying, and that it can be illegal to pay ransomware. A lot of ransomware comes out of really, really bad people. North Korea, bad governments that are on the blacklist of states often will derive income from this, and it's criminals. I mean, by definition, you are paying a criminal when you pay someone that's locked you down with ransomware, because they're committing a crime and asking for money with it. The laws in this country don't allow you necessarily to give money to, ISIS or North Korea or some of these very bad folks that use these criminal activities to raise money. So, our advice typically to clients in a ransomware situation is we would always involve the FBI when we had something like that in the situations that we deal with, which are more B2B. And we normally would advise clients not to pay ransomware, because of the legal liability associated with, paying potentially ISIS or North Korea or somebody else like that. And B, it makes you a good target. Once you pay ransomware once, we've had, obviously I'm not going to name any clients, but I do recall one client that came to us, on their 4th ransomware incident. And, they paid it before, and of course they kept getting hammered because they were a good payer. On the other hand, you may have a hospital system locked down where, if you don't pay $5,000 to unlock something, a bunch of people are going to die, in that kind of situation, that's a tougher call. So it's situational, but the idea is you never want to be in a situation where you have to pay a ransom to save people's lives or get your systems back online. And good backups are the way around ransomware. You plan for it, you run tabletops, you assume that you're going to have systems hit by ransomware at some point. And if you have a plan in place and you have good backups and you test them, a lot of times ransomware is just a hit the reset button annoyance issue rather than a crippling business issue. The next one, the bad egg. This happens a lot. This is public information, but I'm dealing with, for a couple clients, Spotify had a public issue where they had Shopify, I misspoke. Shopify, which is an e-commerce site, had 2 employees a couple weeks ago that took a bunch of customer information from customers of Shopify. So a lot of Shopify clients who use Shopify have gotten notices from them saying, hey, look, a lot of your customer information went out. And it wasn't a hack. It was just some bad egg employees that wanted to take the information and potentially sell it or do something with it. There's a lot of, and unfortunately I don't have time to get into it in great detail, but there's a lot of really cool things that you can do to help detect this kind of thing and figure it out beforehand. You can also make sure that you're segregating access. If you've got somebody working at the front desk or the virtual front desk now, no reason necessarily that they would need access to payroll, right? So typically the best way to protect against bad egg employees or contractors or whoever is to segregate access really well. So people don't necessarily have access to sensitive information they don't need. And then to use data loss protection, it's called DLP or other methods, so that you can figure out when people are doing these things and jump on it pretty quickly, which is, by the way, what Shopify did. They figured it out real quickly and they jumped all over it, got law enforcement involved. And as far as, I've seen, nothing bad has happened associated with the taking of the information yet because they caught it quickly. Next is IoT devices. I would wager many of you, if not most of you, have one of those within eyesight right now. I know I have an Echo and plenty of other things around me. And those are not really designed with security in mind. A lot of them are fairly easy to create mischief with. So we have seen a lot of that more lately, although a lot of that is a little bit more either very, very sophisticated attacks where people are really smart and really targeted on getting at somebody, or they're what I would call really unsophisticated attacks, many of which aren't really done for profit. They're just really nasty, like somebody messing with a child's camera or something. I've seen some horror stories with that where people will, I don't know what kind of sick person would think this is fun, but say things to a kid through a camera that's connected through IoT, when obviously the parent has no idea, and it's just supposed to be a security or nanny cam for the kid. Another issue is website issues. We see that a lot. A lot of websites are not as secure as you think, and through SQL injections or all kinds of other ways, we will regularly see breaches and other incidents that come around from a bad guy taking a good website and getting into it and then redirecting people, like for credit card payments or other things like that. Another very common thing, which see it every day a million times, is someone will take your website, change a character, and then clone your website and then try and impersonate you both through emails. So if you're Dell computers, let's say, then they could register Dell with 3 L's and then put up the Dell website. And then if it looks just like Dell and people are ordering computers and putting in their credit card numbers, oops, then they've successfully taken some money. Plus, they can use the domain to spoof emails. So if you register Dell with 3Ls.com, you could create an email, and a lot of people wouldn't look too closely, right? They'd see it was Dell with 3 L's, and maybe they wouldn't tell the difference. And so you do see a lot of website spoofing. There's been a reaction to that, though. Like our website is a .law domain. So when I was saying my email before, it's alosey@losey.law. Well, to get a .law domain, you have to be a lawyer, and you have to use your bar license to reserve the name, and they check it with the state bar. And so for a lot of top-level domains, .law is an example, there's an effort to create a little bit more than anybody can register it. So nobody that's not a lawyer could register losey.law with 2 L's. And so it's a little bit more secure. So when possible, it's always best to try and find a top-level domain or use top-level domains that are less susceptible to spoofing. But most people use .coms, and anybody with $5 can buy a .com. So it's going to be a prevalent problem. Faxes. And last thing on website issues, a lot of ADA website litigation. The very short version is there's kind of a split in authority on this, but most websites, and again, some websites do not need to be, but there is an argument that most websites need to be compliant with the ADA, meaning somebody with the screen reader can look at them and read them. And so sometimes you see security issues interplay with ADA litigation, which is a very popular litigatory sport right now. Faxes. This used to be more of an issue. Actually pretty rare to see businesses using faxes nowadays, except for in healthcare, where it's still used a little bit just because of habit. And then also a lot of countries like Afghanistan and a lot of countries that don't really have good infrastructure. In a lot of international contexts, you'll see fax being used more because there'll be a country that doesn't really have a good internet connection. I expect that to go away with Starlink and a lot of the satellite-related internet that's going to be readily available in the next decade or so. But you still see some faxes, and a very common breach situation is somebody presses the wrong button. They're trying to send to 555-5555, and they press 555-5556, and a medical record goes out. Those are typically pretty easy to deal with, but they still count in some situations as a breach because you're sending out a record to somebody and you don't know who it is. Messy desks are also a big issue. It's old-fashioned, but it's still a problem, particularly in finance and healthcare. If somebody leaves, it's funny, people still do this, and it boggles my mind. They leave their password on their desk or something else like that, or a list of customer credit card information or something like that. On paper, you'll see a robbery or a burglary, and the information will get stolen, and that's a data breach. That's actually the fact pattern in a lot of the bigger cases on data breaches. They involve messy desks, unlocked computers, and then a burglary. The funny thing about it is I don't really think a lot of these burglars are after the information. They're really just after the computer and a quick cash from a smash and grab. But the consequences are really big. There's a big case here in Florida, I believe it was AvMed, where somebody stole 2 laptops, and those laptops happen to have the information of lots and lots of people on them. And that created a huge amount of litigation, probably cost the company millions of dollars in litigation and other fees. But really, did the people taking it really want the personal information? They probably just wanted the laptops. Vendors. So vendors are often the weak link in the armor. Not to pick on Target or Home Depot at all, but those are pretty well-known data breaches, and those came in through third parties. Target, it was, I think, their HVAC, their air conditioning vendor, that was the attack vector into the organization. So you can be as hardened and as bulletproof as you want with multi-factor and everything else, but if you give a vendor access to your systems and then they're weak, then they'll just get in through your vendor. A big part of our practice on some of the compliance engagements in particular is data mapping. And if you've never been through it with your organization, it's kind of enlightening because you figure out where all the data is kept. And for most companies, you've got 50 plus vendors from Amazon Web Services, Google, Microsoft, Cisco. I won't get into the super long laundry list, all the banks. You're going to have a lot of vendors that have taps into your data. And there are certain requirements in keeping an eye on them and making sure that, even law firms are actually very, very typically, particularly in an IP perspective, when people are looking to get a leg up on the competition by figuring out what they're doing from maybe a patent prosecution or other perspective. If you have a weak link that has a tap into your data, that's a very, very common attack vector. So those are really the big, most obvious attacks that we see. And the solutions to them, again, starting from the top: business email compromise, multi-factor is your friend. If you don't have it on, you should turn it on, and turn it on as soon as you can. Ransomware, good backups and practice, best way to prevent it. Well, not even to prevent it. All these things eventually are going to hit a company of any size, but ransomware is easily recoverable if you have good backups and you know what you're doing and you have a plan. The bad egg employee, segregate access and have DLP or other processes in place. IoT devices are a little bit more situational. It really depends on the devices, but you just need to think about security when you have them in an ecosystem. Website issues is just to pay attention to security, watch them, and multi-factor for website access. I've been surprised to see a lot of companies that are pretty well locked down, but their website isn't. And so if the website has a bare user pass to get in, somebody will probably get into it. Faxes, where possible, don't use faxes. And if you have to use faxes, then have some kind of process to make sure people press the right button. Messy desks, you can take a tip from a lot of banks. Banks are very good about this, by the way, I have to say. Financial institutions, people's money and people's health, those are the two things people tend to care about more than anything else. And those are the two types of data that this country has had heavily regulated through HIPAA, through Gramm-Leach-Bliley. So typically folks in healthcare and finance are really used to having heavy data security because there's additional federal law requiring to keep it secure. And they will regularly at any major bank, have regular sweeps. And if there's stuff on your desk, they leave a little red card, and you get in trouble, you got to go talk to the manager. But for messy desks, it's something that a manager needs to make sure doesn't really happen. You should always assume at any time somebody's going to break into your office and steal things. So if there's important documents that you need to keep in paper, then lock them up. But in most cases, you don't want to have a lot of paper anyway if you can avoid it. Most information is born, lives, and dies in electronic form. And the paper copy is really only something that you would do as a convenience with some exceptions. So as the world goes paperless, this has been less of a problem. Vendors, you got to vet your vendors. So that's okay. You can go to the next one. There's a cooler picture on the next slide anyway. For the vendors, all it is you have to vet it. Not to get too much into the litigation part of it, but in litigation with the vendor, a big issue is often, what did you do to vet your vendor? If the answer is nothing, it's a little bit difficult of a battle, particularly in some jurisdictions that have some requirements that you do vet your vendors. And it's often not that hard to vet a vendor because vendors want to talk about it. I love it when clients ask us, oh, what do you do for data security? Because I go, oh, great, here's this report and that report, and here's what we do. And so most vendors will want to tell you about all the good stuff they do with data security. And if they hem and haw and they're like, oh, yeah, we'll get back to you on that, then you might have something to worry about if your vendors won't talk to you about data security and what they're doing. And most of them are going to have cyber risk insurance, as well as other things in place that often will come into contract negotiations. Normally with vendors, if they put their money where their mouth is, you can feel a little more comfortable. When you're contracting with them, if you ask them to indemnify you if they have a data breach, then that should make you feel a little more comfortable with them. So the best thing you can do in general with data breaches is have a plan in place. And that way you can execute on your plan and not panic. You will have a data breach at some point in some fashion and at some level. Every business will. It's just too prevalent. Every business of any size that's around long enough. So like anything else where it's going to happen at some point with a very reasonable certainty, you should have a plan in place to deal with it. And that way, when there's a data breach, you just execute on the plan rather than panic. I'd say our engagements are about 50-50, give or take. Half of our data breach matters. It's something where the business hasn't really thought about it, doesn't really have a plan in place. And, they're kind of scrambling to figure out what to do. About the other half, they have what's called a written information security policy, which is a WISP, and an incident response policy, which are the acronyms up there. Those acronyms come from Massachusetts law, which requires you, if you have information from a Massachusetts resident, to have these documents in place. But basically what they are is the written information security policy governs what you do to keep your information secure, vetting your vendors, having multi-factor, things like that. The incident response policy is more of a break glass in case of emergency guide. So it'll have a phone tree with pre-selected players ready to go with phone and email. So okay, here's the IT person that's going to seal the breach. Here's the lawyer that's going to quarterback it. Here's the PR firm if you need that. Some larger companies will typically engage a crisis PR firm for this kind of thing. Credit monitoring, and where appropriate, your insurer. Insurers, if you have cyber risk, obviously want prompt notice of the claim. And the insurers will often direct a lot of the process, and they'll have a panel of providers. So particularly if you have cyber risk insurance, you would want to make sure that okay, well, I have this provider, here's my retainage or deductible, here's the people I can use with that policy. And keep a paper copy. This is a fun tip. There was a ransomware attack in San Francisco like 4 years ago now. And they had a good plan in place, but my understanding is the ransomware attack locked it down. So if you have a great plan and all this, and it's all locked down and you can't get to it, then that's a problem. So, normally a one-pager, just in case there's some issue on who to call at least, is a good thing to have. I can't always pull up a file. So remember the words of Helmuth von Moltke, the elder, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. Same with the breach. You can have a beautiful written information security policy and a beautiful incident response policy, and something really crazy can happen and kind of throw it all out the window. So what happens when a typical breach occurs? So I'll go into a brief overview and drill into the details. Boils down into there's an uh-oh moment or a call. Surprisingly, that doesn't come as quick as you think. Most times the uh-oh moment comes a little bit later, typically at least a week after there's actually been a breach, unless there's a lot of money taken. I'll give you an example. We had one where, they got about $7.5 million from someone, and about $1.5 million we were able to get back. But the other money went out so far back that there was little that we could do because it seemed legitimate. A lot of money, by the way, if you act very quickly within 72 hours and it's not going to China, Russia, or some other countries, you can pull money back. There's things Secret Service and FBI and others can do with fraud transactions, but you have to act very, very fast. You know, if money goes out and it's been a month, it's very, very difficult to get it back. So you've got the uh-oh moment in the call, the incident response, which is largely sealing the breach, working with forensic people, working with FBI or law enforcement, if it's international law enforcement, then notification and a response center, and then the inevitable ex post facto analysis where everybody looks at everything you've done and they try and find ways to poke holes in it. You know, regulators, courts, plaintiffs' lawyers, whoever you want to pick. Next up. So the uh-oh moment, the source will vary. Often it's internal. Somebody realizes they make a mistake. You know, a comptroller realizes they just emailed out all the payroll information to some random person on accident. So a lot of it is self-reporting and internal. A lot of it's also audit. You know, typically when you see an audit, you find stuff, and a lot of companies will have IT auditors or vendors come in for other reasons, like M&A due diligence or just a routine data security audit, and they'll find something. A lot of times those things have been going on for a very long time. Like, not uncommon, you'll have an auditor come in and they'll find out, uh-oh, there have been bad guys in the system for 3 years. So white knight kind of folks, which are the good hackers. A lot of times you'll get a random email from somebody, or through a bug bounty program, someone will say, hey, look, you know, I'm not a bad guy, but I just want to let you know, it looks like your stuff is out there. You might want to be aware. The government will sometimes come knocking at your door. You know, the FBI or another agency may say, hey, look, you know, it looks like you got a problem. We're finding some of your information out there. Or bad guys. Sometimes the bad guys will tell you, we have your information, we want money to keep it secret, or something else like that. There's very different issues with each. The main thing at the uh-oh moment is you got to be really quick and you got to be clever in figuring out, is it really an issue or is it a false alarm? And is there anything that we can do very quickly to address it? You know, a good example I give was, we had one a couple years ago where there was a file cabinet with paper in it. And in going paperless, you know, this company had digitized a lot of this information. And this was information of very, very, very high net worth people that are very into privacy, and also, you know, have at least 5 million and up in assets that somebody could try and steal. And that file cabinet was given to Goodwill with all of these people's financial information and really stuff that would have been really, really bad. And, you know, within 24 hours, you know, we started to talk about notification, and then we kind of thought, well, wait a minute. It went to Goodwill. What Goodwill? You know, can we get somebody with petty cash out to Goodwill, like right now, like on this call, get somebody driving out to Goodwill with money to buy it back? And they were able to buy it back same day. You know, they didn't even try and get it back. They just said, hey, I'm going to buy that. And it was still locked, and it still had all the paper in it. So it went from a really messy breach to, in our opinion, a non-issue, because it was a locked cabinet that went directly to Goodwill and directly back, and nobody else had access to it. Nobody had a key. So sometimes if you act really quickly, you can either make it so it's not a breach, or you can really stem the bleeding very quickly. Ostriching normally ends really badly. The really messiest ones I've seen, and the biggest penalties levied and careers ruined and people fired, is when people do this, when they just kind of stick their head in the sand, where you know you have a problem. And what I like to tell clients too is, this is a really natural human thing to want to do, and you shouldn't feel bad or guilty to want to do this, because a data breach is very difficult to deal with. It involves dealing with regulators, a lot of hassle, a lot of time, and a lot of money. And like anything else, if an enormous hassle pops up on your plate, the tendency is just to want it to go away. You know, the natural human tendency, and I think it's okay to embrace that this is what you feel, is just you want to stick your head in the sand, and you're like, oh God, I don't want to deal with this. Can we just, you know, block the bad access going forward and ignore this? The problem is you can't do that. And if you do that, what normally happens is it comes out later. because normally when you see a little something, you maybe don't realize that there might be a little more there. People are doing something with something. So the worst cases I've seen are when you have an issue and you have somebody that ostriches. Almost always the person that makes that decision is fired and sued, fired or sued, or both. And so you just need to be really, really careful before you decide to ostrich, although you should recognize that it's a natural human tendency to want to do that. You just don't want to do it because it doesn't end well most times. So the preliminary incident response, what's that like? Well, the toothpaste is out of the tube at that point, and acting quickly can make a world of difference. So you have the internal people, you have forensics, which are IT professionals that come in and try and help. You have your insurer, which typically, if you have cyber risk insurance, is going to want to be not only informed, but is going to be a part of that process. You've got regulators, both state level, and every state has a law on data breach notification, and a lot of them you have to write letters to the AG or the appropriate police department if there's been a data breach involving even one person. Law enforcement's involvement, it really depends. I've had issues where there have been $6-7 million taken and it didn't really merit a lot of law enforcement attention, but then I've had smaller issues that they've really latched onto. So generally with law enforcement, if they don't tell you about the breach, you tell them, and their level of interest depends on a lot of things. Then public relations, sometimes you get external PR firms, sometimes you don't. That's client preference. There's different issues with each, there's different priorities with each, and there's a lot of ticking clocks. There's different deadlines for different state and federal laws. We'll get into more on notification on the next slide. So we have a patchwork of laws that change monthly, if not weekly, as to notification in different states. And the problem is a lot of companies have information from a lot of people from a lot of different states, and the state law applies associated with the person. So if you have data from people from 50 states, you got to worry about 50 state laws, and those are changing every month. So size matters, particularly over 500 people. Typically, if it affects over 500 people, you need to make media notification. Credit monitoring and identity protection services are often optional, but more and more states are requiring it in certain types of data breaches. Insurer preferences and panels are often the key. Different insurers will have different requirements associated with who or what you can use, and you want to know that. You want to know that before you have a breach. Then you need to typically notify individuals, law enforcement agencies, and regulators. The choreography is really tough on timing because there's a quick clock, and it's not uncommon. I won't hear about something till 20 days after it happens. You have a 30-day notification deadline. You need to do a lot of things before you notify, and also state regulators get really angry at you if you don't notify everybody at the same time. So, you may have 30 to 50 regulators you're notifying on the same morning as you're sending out something later in the day to however many people are affected. So the choreography tends to be really complicated and difficult. Hopefully one day we're going to have some federal law that will clean up a little bit of the patchwork of a mess with a lot of different state laws and regulations, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Scripting and setting up call centers is more difficult than you think. You normally have to set up a toll-free number where people can call in, ask questions, and other things like that. And obviously, you don't just set up a toll-free number and tell people, here, go at it. You have to set up a script, and you have to train, and you have to do other things. You also have to figure out how to deal with free riders and phishers. So one of the funnier things that happens is you set up the call center, and inevitably you get people calling in that weren't affected, that just want credit monitoring or want money. And inevitably, you also get bad guys calling in trying to trick the call centers into giving them information. The other thing is, don't forget contractual requirements. This is probably the biggest scramble that we normally see. So when I'm talking about the 30-day deadline, I'm talking about like default law, Florida statutes, New Hampshire civil code, things that are just applicable to everybody. You also have a lot of contracts in place with vendors. Those contracts with vendors or with your customers or with your clients may say something else. It's pretty common for companies to put into contracts that you have to notify them as soon as possible, no later than 48 hours after you have a confirmed breach. So that's a pretty hard deadline to meet. Most clients, we advise them to have some kind of chart or in their contract management system or their CMS some kind of tracking system as to what the incident response notification requirements are, because a not uncommon thing is you have a breach, it comes in our door a couple weeks after it happened, and then we get like 400 contracts that are all a little bit different, and we need to go through those for a client to figure out the breach notification deadlines. And when we're looking through them, a lot of them will say 24 or 48 hours, and it's already been 2 weeks. So that's a difficult and time-sensitive thing to deal with, where it's better to get ahead of it. Next up. So then the breach is sealed. Hopefully you figured out what's gone on and you've closed the breach and your notifications are out. What happens next? So the regulatory letter, response, and position statement depends on your industry, but typically you will get at least a little letter from regulators, state attorney generals, or others that range. Sometimes they say, thank you for your report. We'll let you know if we need anything further. Sometimes they'll say, hey, thank you for your report. And they'll have just like a little comment like, hey, we want to confirm that no social security numbers went out, or something like that. And then sometimes it's a little more hefty, particularly in healthcare or finance, which probably won't affect most of you, but it's, here are 37 questions. We want to know answers to these within 30 days. And if we don't have them, then you're going to get a civil investigative subpoena or something else like that. Best to think about that beforehand. Most of the major breaches that we have, we know what kind of regulatory letter that they're going to get, and we start drafting the response and figuring that out beforehand. Employee discipline is tough. It's one of the tougher, more human issues to deal with the data breach. Interviews are normal. Normally when you have a breach, particularly email compromise, you need to interview the person right away, because you need to know what did they have in their email account. A lot of times they'll tell you, oh yeah, I had a notes file that had all the bank account passwords and all this and all that. So you need to talk to people quickly. But it's hard to figure out what to do. I mean, this is a tough problem, but normally you do need to fire people that can't keep information safe. And this is happening less and less, but a common issue we'd see is there's somebody that's a good employee, but they just can't, they can't figure out when someone is trying to trick them. And they'll get hit multiple times with information security incidents, and it's tough. But a good general statement is, if an employee is actually incapable of keeping sensitive data secure, something needs to often be done about that. And again, it can be tough because frequently they're good in other respects. State AG discussions and investigations, that depends on the severity of the breach. Potential litigation with affected individuals. It's normally negligence, which is duty, breach, causation, damages. Argument is you have a duty to keep the data safe. You failed by not having multi-factor or whatever. There was a breach, and then you caused damages because they got their information. It's actually really hard for plaintiffs now, which is good for us because we're on the defense side on these. But it's hard to show causation, because when a plaintiff comes and they say to us, hey, we've been damaged by having my data go out, we do discovery and we find out their data has also gone out in 20 other data breaches. So how do you know that it was us? How do you know it was Home Depot that harmed you? So there's a lot of good defenses. There's often indemnity claims, meaning contractual provisions about who holds the ball. There's insurance issues. Sometimes you can be in a dispute with your insurer, sometimes not, about whether something's covered or not. And again, don't forget those contractual requirements. And then what we normally do for a serious breach is a lessons learned at the end. One of the worst things you can do for a client is handle the breach and then just move on and never talk to them about how to stop it again, because then you get a repeat customer. You don't want a repeat customer on a data breach. You want to talk about what happened, talk about additional things that can be done going forward to stop it from happening. And that's easy to forget to do, but it's important to do a lesson learned at the end of one. On litigation, typically a lot of battle over class certification, normally negligence, but again, there's other causes of action. The causation issues are a big deal. You'll see cross claims for indemnity. And Epic Systems, Corp v. Lewis, it's not a new case anymore, but basically you have a lot more flexibility and oomph in forcing people into arbitration clauses and class waivers. This is going to trickle into breaches more and more over time. And typically speaking, if I'm defending a breach, I'm going to be in a happier situation if the affected individuals have some sort of arbitration class waiver language in a contract with them. And I know I'm running out of time, and I want to have time for questions. And let me check my email. It doesn't look like I have any as of yet. But parting shots before we get to any questions you've got. As in many things, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I mean, most of the big nasty breaches I've had could have been prevented with, you know, very, we'll say 1/100th of the effort that it took. But it's really easy to not want to address this stuff because it's a little bit of a hassle. Security is a little bit of a hassle, right? It's a little bit of a hassle to like take your phone and look at the code every time you enter into your email. But it's worth it, and I can near guarantee that particularly now, you will have some kind of data security incident affect you, probably this year. I mean, within the next couple months, I can almost guarantee every single person here is going to have a data security incident affect them. Maybe not at your company, maybe not you personally, maybe it's somebody that you use, you know, a vendor or something like that. It's just omnipresent, and there's billions, if not trillions of dollars that's being made by a lot of the bad guys here. And if you want somebody to do something, make it profitable. I mean, they are making a lot of money off this. And the way to stop it is to make it unprofitable, to not let them get in. And if they do, to make sure they don't get money out of it. So, you know, taking a little bit of time and effort to address this on the front end is the best thing that you can possibly do. Tabletops are worth it. You know, you should have a pretend breach. You know, I'm here in Orlando. I live not so far from the Pllc nightclub, and one of my neighbors and good friends, it was the head of emergency medicine for that hospital. And not long before everybody, you know, that happened and they brought everybody into the hospital, they had done a tabletop, essentially. They had done a practice mass casualty event. My understanding is not a single person from that shooting that made it to the hospital alive died. I mean, they did a tremendous job. And that was attributed to the fact that they had practiced just before for something just like that. It's the same in every context that I know of, from emergency medicine to cybersecurity to handling an insurance claim. If you practice something and you walk through it, you're almost always going to do a better job, both because you're going to be used to some of it, and also in practicing, you're going to figure out things. You know, every time I've run a breach tabletop, there have been things that have maybe gone wrong or haven't gone as smooth as the client would have liked during the tabletop, and that lets you learn. You know, for example, frequent if you have a big breach for it to dominate somebody's time and effort, but nobody really has as part of their job description, unless they're a CISO, hey, I'm going to manage the breach and I'm going to do all that. So a lot of it is figuring out who internally bears what burdens. Next thing is there should be consequences, but it can be draconian to penalize people without training or warning. You know, again, handling employees that are unable to keep data secure or give out a password can be a really difficult issue. Although folks that repeatedly fail penetration testing, meaning testing, most of you probably do this. Our firm, for example, pays a company every day to pick someone at our firm and then try and get into some of their systems. And if they succeed, they get a bonus. They get so they're really good. I mean, they're very clever. And if they trick somebody, no bad guy has actually got anything, because it's somebody that we pay to try and trick our people. But it keeps people on their toes, and it lets me know if we had somebody that repeatedly failed pen testing, they could be the best lawyer in the world, but they wouldn't be able to work here anymore because they wouldn't be able to keep client information secure. Luckily, I haven't had to do that yet. But it's something that every business needs to be very cognizant of. This presentation could also be outdated in a month. The law is constantly in flux, and typically it's a good idea to check to see if anything's changed, if issues arise. But I can tell you the fundamental point of this is an issue. You know, you're going to have problems with it, and ostriching is bad. Those things I think will remain constant throughout time. And then any issues unique to social services. I know I'm out of time. I've got about 5 minutes. What we've seen, what to watch for in particular. In your industry sector, the thing I see most, which is pretty common, is more going after CFOs, comptrollers, anybody that has access to money, and then just trying to drain bank accounts or do other things by tricking people. Again, that's nothing new. It's nothing fancy. It's just something to watch for. And hopefully you all have some questions. I'm going to pause for a second, check the private chat, and then also check my email to see if I've got any.
Hi again, FIT members. Justin Wiley back with questions from the audience. So Adam, the first question that we have for you is, what is the most common cause of a breach?
Sure, it's somebody's password either being given out, I would say, by some spoofing email, or somebody using repeat passwords. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes. Often we don't know how a bad guy got in. We just know a bad guy got in. But people will often use the same passwords for multiple accounts. It's very, very, very common. And so, you may like, let's say, woodworking. That's your hobby. And you find this website like woodworking.net or whatever. And, you create a username and password. And it may look like a legitimate site. It may even have like materials on woodworking. But really, it's a bad guy that is Googling everybody's name. And he's like, oh, that's Adam Losey in Orlando. He runs that law firm. Here's his password. Let me just try it on his email. And then boom, they're in. It can be that simple. I see another question. Do you recommend agencies keep a list of staff password to agency-owned equipment and site access passwords? I probably wouldn't if you have admin control, unless you had that locked down really well. And it depends on the equipment. Like for a lot of equipment and a lot of things, nobody really has the password other than the individual, and the admin can reset it, keeping a minimum level of access. If you've got like hard devices, like, I don't know, like an actual, well, this is a Kindle, but if you had a device that had device level passwords, then of course you have to keep, some kind of list of that password. But the key is, multi-factor works in a lot of ways. So if you're going to have a master list of passwords, have that in itself encrypted by a password and kept somewhere where there's multiple layers of access control. I generally don't love, if you can avoid it, big lists of access credentials, because a lot of like otherwise small breaches that you'll see become very big breaches, because the bad guy goes, oh yeah, I got this email account and now I got the spreadsheet and it's got all the passwords to all these IoT devices all over Florida for this agency. And now I can go on all these cameras and have fun. So whenever you can get a big list, not existent, like social security numbers is another thing. I've seen clients that collect socials and they don't really have a good reason to have them. And if you don't have a good reason to have something that's sensitive, best not to have it. Good email hygiene helps a lot too. Us personally, we don't really keep emails after 2 years unless we have to, for some particular reason. So, if somebody, God forbid, got into my workplace email account, and good luck to them, there's a lot of things to stop them. They wouldn't have anything going back more than 2 years. And my personal email account probably has 3 or 4 emails in it. And I've had that account for like 10 years. I just don't keep stuff unless I need it. And if I need it, I would keep it somewhere else. Another good tip is I have an email account that's my password reset email account that has nothing in it and is only used for logins for websites. So, if somebody compromises your primary email account and you're using it also as your username login, for various websites, then they're going to get a lot of things at once, right? They'll get your emails, they'll get this, they'll get that. And it's good to have a standalone email account that you don't use for correspondence. The only thing that you use it for is for username, password, for logins for different sites.
If there was a best way to protect from a breach, a single thing that you can do, what would that be?
Skepticism. A lot of the stuff like multi-factor and the other things, these are very easy, simple things to do that most people do or will be doing, or you'll have a breach and then you'll do it afterwards. The thing that is not going away is just people tend to be pretty trusting, pretty nice. And I think that's great, but you need to be really, really skeptical of anything that you receive online from anybody. And the problem is, like, 364 days of the year, you may be fine. But the one day of the year that, you just found out, you got COVID, you're trying to get a brief out, you got a 3-year-old that's screaming, and you get an email from your comptroller yelling at you to send out some wire, and it's an hour before, Hanukkah or Christmas Eve, that's when they really get people. Like and this has been, I've talked to CEOs of publicly traded companies that have made $10 million, mistakes, and people that when this happens, they say, I can't believe I did this. Like, now that I'm looking at it and I see what I did or what I told somebody to do, I'm ashamed that I did it, but they just hit me at the wrong time. And you got to realize these are really pretty awful people that are criminals that are smart. They're not dumb. It's not like kids sitting in the basement doing this. These are people that go into office buildings every day, dressed well like you, with the flag of North Korea in the background, and their job is to sit at that desk with their coffee from 8 to 5 and figure out how to trick you and get money. They're not dumb. And so you have to be very, very skeptical of anything that you come across and anybody asking you for any information. And even includes talking on the phone with people, so skepticism is probably the best thing that and frankly, this is just me personally, but maybe it's because I'm a lawyer. I think skepticism is a healthy trait to have, just from a living your life perspective.
I agree with you there. So the last question that we have is, what law or laws apply to a breach?
Good question. And the answer is the law associated with any individual affected by the breach, as well as any jurisdiction. So this is often an issue with GDPR in Europe, where Europe would probably tell you that if you have data from a European, GDPR and European law might apply. That's a debatable point from my perspective. And then, if you have information from a Canadian law may apply. So one of the big problems with this is it's typically every state, and it's often a lot of other countries too. And many of the laws conflict with each other, like directly conflict with each other in what you have to do, which can create some challenges to when you have a big breach. You're always going to have some compliance risk. You just have to do your best to mitigate it.